is up, Internet? Look, we were all wearing hats. My sister has always been a bit showy. My name is Matthew Kroll.
Hola, Internet, and did people it did. End of story. My name is Shahir Dowd.
And this is the only podcast about movies, specifically the film, well, I would say, Flowers.
But it's not, well, you might say that. The people in the region that we're in might call it Loreak.
Yes.
People in the region slightly south of where we're at might call it Flores.
Right. So, and also, you might hear some differences in the audio where we are recording this. We are coming at you not so live from Bilbao, Spain. Shahir and I don't know if you've followed this in the past. You might have seen some social media posts, but we work the EMAs, the European Music Awards for MTV. Every year they bring us out to a new city, and it seems like we're on the same job, and then we have to do a podcast from said city.
And I wanted to do something slightly different this year. I've always been interested in the idea that we would look at a place through a movie, and the opportunity to travel to Spain was something that came up very suddenly for both of us, and I thought, what a great opportunity, what a great fortuitous opportunity for us to try something a little different. And what I wanted to try here was not necessarily look at a new release or something that's on the radar for most of our listeners,
right?
But maybe talk about how you can discover a place through the movies that place produces. And we are in Bilbao, which is Basque country.
Yes. Also, kick-ass city.
Very cool city.
We've been having
Beautiful.
a ton of fun. We spent the day.
Yeah.
We went up a almost vertical tram up a mountain, and then we walked like 9 miles and had some beautiful steak.
Oh my God, that steak was so good.
And now we're going to some other fancy restaurant after this. We're just going to tell you about our vacation
Yeah,
plans.
we're living the high life right now. But the reason I wanted to also record us outside is I wanted to give our listeners a sense of place. And maybe in the background you might hear some conversations that are going on in Spanish, perhaps in the Basque language. And this is a unique case as well, because the language that is of this region is what's called a language isolate, which is that it exists nowhere else, and the origins of the language are uncertain.
What do you mean it's uncertain?
They're not exactly sure where this language comes from.
Well, it's got to come from somewhere.
There are theories about where it comes from and how it integrates with the French border as well, but it's fairly uncertain. For example, there's theories of Germanic languages, so we understand that they come from the area of where Germany was.
Sure.
There's a little bit of uncertainty about the Basque language. Now, the Basque language is also interesting because during the Franco reign, the Basque language was really limited, so it wasn't actually permitted to be spoken. So it was in fact outlawed in this area.
What?
And then it was brought back. The rules were kind of lessened after Franco's reign, and it was brought back. But it's only spoken by about I think 800,000 people.
Wow.
And the interesting thing is we're going to be doing a film that is specifically in the Basque language.
Right, but here's the other little bit of a tidbit. So we prepped for this, ladies and gentlemen, and all fellow human beings. Basically, we each rented the movie, $4.99 on iTunes. I suggest you do it.
Yeah.
So we could watch it on the plane, and then lo and behold, on the flight out here, it was available on the back headset thing of the plane, which made for an interesting watching experience. Not only because when the pilot interrupts you at dramatic moments, that could probably break your immersion, but also I noticed it was actually dubbed
in Spanish.
So
on a Spanish airline. So I was like, oh, maybe they just did a ton of ADR, because I know that happens from time to time, but that is not the case. we watched the film in Spanish, but not the Basque language that is spoken predominantly here in Bilbao. Yeah.
So even though the film was made in that language.
Yeah. So it is a little bit of an unusual situation. Now, the reason I picked this film as well is that it's a 2014 film directed by John Garaño and José María Goenaga. And it is an unusual film in that it is the first Basque language film to be nominated for a Goya, and it was the first Basque language film from Spain to be submitted to the Academy Awards to be nominated for Best Foreign Film. Now, it didn't get nominated in either of those circumstances, but however, it is unusual for a Basque language film, especially, again, a language that is previously outlawed, a language that is only spoken by about 800,000 people, to have been spoken, to be nominated for that. So I think that was kind of an extraordinary thing. That was something that came up when I was doing some research about Bilbao and the cinema of Bilbao. The other, if we backtrack just for a second as well, the other film that really comes up a lot when you look up the cinema of Bilbao is, oddly enough, the Michael Apted James Bond Pierce Brosnan vehicle,
Yes.
The World Is Not Enough, which features a scene set in Bilbao. I was not, however, going to have us do that film.
I don't know why. I think it's great. It literally, you know what though? Let's pause for a second to talk about that for just 2 minutes. That is the James Bond film where the High Sparrow, I forget the actor's name.
Yeah, Jonathan.
Also, Elizabeth Swan's father.
Yeah.
I only know actors through mainstream blockbuster film and television shows. But he plays a news mogul that uses the news and general misinformation to help control the world.
Jonathan
James Bond,
Pryce.
yeah, thank you, Jonathan Pryce, to control the world, and James Bond stops him. We're living through a precarious time right now where news organizations seem to be doing rather similar things. Granted, they're not on a giant what was it? It was a type of boat with the two pontoons.
Yeah.
The giant stealth boat that then Pierce Brosnan had to go in. But we're experiencing something similar. So all I'm saying, Shahir, is while this film that we watched is lovely, and I'm looking forward to diving into why we did it, and also not only the film itself, but how it sort of framed my initial reasonings of what I thought this city would be.
Yeah.
But we could have also done that too. We could have done James Bond.
We would have done The World Is Not Enough just for like the 1 5-minute scene of Pierce Brosnan being in Bilbao and having a fight sequence outside the Guggenheim.
Yeah.
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 Okay. No.
That's what the people come for, Shahir.
Yeah. The thing I guess I wanted to talk about is we did an episode a while back called Race and Representation, where we talked really about how important it is to see yourself on screen and what and how it can change and mean a lot to you. I guess you would call this episode Place and Representation.
Okay,
because
we're not going to call it that, but we can do that for now.
We can do that for now. Well, the reason I was thinking about that in relation to our trip to Bilbao as well is the first time I saw New Zealand on film, which is obviously you live in the United States, so you're used to seeing America on film, right? Because that is the predominant origin of most films.
You know what? Correct.
Yeah, that's a fair assumption there. I am from Fiji and then from New Zealand. And I remember the very first time I saw a place that I actually lived in on film.
Okay.
And oddly, though, it was for... there's some debate about this, but it was for an American movie, which is Peter Jackson's movie, The Frighteners, which was made in New Zealand.
Okay.
But my...
Frighteners is great.
My local... it was actually the Miramar local dairy. They call it a dairy, which is the equivalent of a deli in New Zealand.
Okay.
Doubled for an American store. And it was American streets, and then all of a sudden the Wellington city, which I'm used to, the Wellington region, was now doubling as an American as an American small town.
Copy that.
But I remember seeing my town for the first time on screen, and it being a little bit startling, and it got me thinking about how we feel when the place we live is represented on screen, whether it's accurate, inaccurate, whether we feel it kind of represents what we believe our home to be like. Again, I haven't seen too much of Fiji on screen, so I would be really curious about that.
To be honest, I haven't seen much of New Hampshire on screen, and oftentimes when it is represented, it is not actually New Hampshire.
Right.
The last film that took place in New Hampshire that I watched was The Witch. It's in the lands that is now New Hampshire.
It's not now, and Manchester by the Sea is not New Hampshire.
No, that is Massachusetts.
Massachusetts.
Yeah,
but it's sort of.
But I went to college around there, so yeah, I did have a similar. You're 100% correct. Manchester by the Sea. I didn't grow up there, but it's a place I'm familiar with. That fits into good catch on my history, Shahir.
Well, that's what I was thinking about, and I was going to pose that question to you about either the first time you saw it or how you feel about seeing New Hampshire on screen.
I mean, I honestly haven't seen it much. I think actually your point about my life is actually probably better than the one I was going to use, being The Witch. I mean, because I spent a lot of time in the woods, and it looked legit when I was a kid. Yeah. But no, Manchester by the Sea. If you go back and listen to that review, if you already haven't, that was a fun one with Julie Lillaby, I believe, was on Manchester by the Sea. Yeah. Wonderful guest. Hello, shout out Julie. It just felt, and you know what though, this is the interesting thing about that. I think that movie definitely felt like places that I went to college and hung out at, no question. Like just the feeling of it. But that feeling honestly came from the people and the actors more than the locations looked familiar, sure. Yeah. But I feel like Manchester by the Sea, for a film that is literally the title is describing a place.
Yeah.
The place itself actually didn't have a lot of the effectiveness that I think the characters and the characters brought to it.
Well,
location didn't. The location portrayal in the film, as far as physical locations, didn't have the emotional impact that, say, the characters portrayed in the film felt like people that I grew up and were around for formulative years of my life. So it did the same thing, but it did it in a different way.
See, and I guess I don't want to presume as well that every film has to kind of like make the, that classic, the location is the character kind of, the location is a character kind of thing.
No, totally.
It's more the idea that, like, when you see a place on screen, does it really feel does it feel like home to you, or does it feel like a place you actually know?
Right.
And this obviously changes as well, because it can also include places you visited. So it's not necessarily, like...
Such as Bilbao.
Or, we've done trips to Amsterdam and seen films from Amsterdam. I guess the thing I really want to get at here is, like, thinking about movies that identify place very strongly. And there are a couple of films that came to mind when I think about that. I was listening to the Blank Check podcast recently, and they were talking. They've had a long-running series about Ang Lee, and they were talking about how they felt Ang Lee was a very good observer of place.
Okay.
True. Good example of that is a film like Brokeback Mountain, where you really observe what that mountain was and like how it works, and you feel it as a presence in the entire film. And so I was starting to think about that, and I was starting to think about films where place really plays a strong part in the movie.
Right.
The film that comes to mind immediately for me is Y Tu Mama Tambien, Alfonso Cuarón's film, which is really it's a road trip film, so they are traveling through a place, and then there is a narrator commenting on that place, and it's commenting in a sort of unique and interesting way. Mm-hmm. But I feel like that is something that films do in a sort of more immediate way that novels can do, for example, which is identify a location by place visually and conjure the feeling of it. And I was this is much more esoteric, much more difficult, much more ephemeral.
Yeah, I thought we were going to be talking about flowers.
Yeah. Than say race and representation, which is directly about the people on screen. But like,
but I would argue.
Okay,
again, going back to Manchester by the Sea, that actually it's a combination of all things. Mm-hmm. Like honestly, the people, the cast and the acting in Manchester by the Sea is what made that feel familiar to me as a place, because the place I knew had people exactly like that. That was the sort of thing. Like, did it look like a miserable town in winter? Sure. Yeah, I'm familiar with that too. But that wasn't the focal point. The focal point was sort of the emotional impact that the characters had, and the familiarity that the characters had around characters in my family and friends.
Right.
And wait. So here's a question.
Okay.
So either, I mean, we could go New Zealand, like you mentioned. Yep. We could also go Fiji.
Fiji is where I was born. Yeah.
Has there ever been a film that you've seen that's set in Fiji that you're like yes or no?
There was a film that was shot in Fiji. Well, first off, I think parts of Castaway, the Tom Hanks movie with where Tom Hanks is stranded on an island, was shot in Fiji. But
so did it feel like it?
Well, this is the other thing, is the parts of Fiji I lived in weren't like isolated desert islands.
Right.
But the other thing I remember as well is when I saw the first preview for Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
The Fellowship of the Rings, and there was like a wide shot, sort of almost silhouette, where you see the Fellowship running across a mountaintop, and you see the cloud lines behind them. And New Zealand's Maori name is Aotearoa, which literally translates to the land of the long white cloud.
Oh.
And it was really interesting watching that scene, because the cloud formations, I was like, yep, that's New Zealand. That's what New Zealand looks like.
Sure.
I noticed that I just recently did a trip to Florida, and Florida has like a different sort of types of clouds that you would see often in the sky. And New Zealand is very much like that.
Is it garbage?
No, it's actually very pretty. You get sort of the like thunderous clouds more often.
Yeah, I meant like dark, sinister.
Yeah, you get that, but they form and they're sort of
the mountain ranges change the way the cloud structure and yada yada.
But I remember seeing Lord of the Rings for the first time and seeing that cloud, and I was like, yep, that's New Zealand, all right. Like most of the time, like in Lord of the Rings, for example, it's doubling as Middle Earth or some other place.
Right.
But the New Zealander looks at it and goes, yep, that's New Zealand.
Yep.
And I'm you know,
They go, yip.
Yep. That's if you're
I'm catching on.
Boba Fett.
Yep.
Is it Boba Fett's son?
Jango
No.
Fett. Well, it's Boba Fett says it. He says it to Jango Fett.
I tell you, that got the biggest laugh in any New Zealand audience. There is a film, I can't remember the name of the film, but the other film that was shot in New Zealand, again, shot in Fiji on an isolated beach, was returned to the Blue Lagoon, I believe.
Oh.
There is a film called The Something Turtle. I've forgotten what it is.
Ah, yes.
The Something Turtle.
Something Turtle.
The Something Turtle. Might have been the Red Turtle. Or something
It could
like
be.
that. Yes, if you do know what that title is,
you can
write
email
us
us in at onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com. Also at Twitter at onlymoviepod if you know that, or if you just like to talk about films in general that you can relate to the place and that you feel you either know or represented a movie in an incredibly different light than you're used to, especially if you're from that place.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd love to hear some stories about that because it's interesting. And even going back to the film that we're going to be talking about today, even though we will be meandering back and forth through this conversation, I really enjoyed seeing this film because while it didn't take place predominantly in Bilbao, it definitely. I mean, we've been here 4 days.
So we don't really
have a
clear
huge
sense of
thing.
space, yeah.
But we've done a lot of walking around, and there is a general feeling to not let's sort of break it down a little bit. First of all, the geography is very it's very mountainy here, very large hills sort of things rolling through. In the film itself, a lot of the stuff in this movie, for instance, takes place on roads that have big tunnels through them and toll booths and the structures of the buildings that they go in and out of all feel very like the architecture feels similar. So the landscape definitely did not feel like obviously America or anywhere else in the country or in the world, but just sort of like the imagery that I saw, like especially on like the wides that were just sort of sitting there for a bit. Yeah, it was always a winding road, a beautiful green mountain, and probably part of a tunnel. Right. And that's a lot of what I've seen around here, which is it's amazing how those three very simple things can look so amazing when A, well kept, and B, placed in aesthetically pleasing places.
Yeah, it's interesting to kind of get a sense of a place before you arrive there and kind of have that sense of that place validated by your actual reaction to the place than what you saw. So the other side of this coin, though, is for example, the people of Fargo, North Dakota, who who've infamously now been associated with a movie.
The people of South Park, Illinois.
Yeah, exactly. Who have now been infamously associated with a certain film that kind of depicts their landscape in a certain way, and also the way their people operate in a certain way. But so the broader section the broader idea here isn't just the place, but also the way people are and the way the language works and the way basically, like you said before, place doesn't encapsulate just the location. Sure. It's actually just the sort of sense of where we are in the world that is different and unique to where other places are in the world. A couple of other films that came to mind, again, for me, What We Do in the Shadows, Taika Waititi's film about hilarious vampires, is set in Wellington City, and it's the Wellington City that I knew going to university. It is exactly that Wellington City. Yep. It's like dirty apartments, terrible flatmates. Going to there was a pub called the Fat Lady's Arms, which I think was in the film as well. So it was the first time I ever saw my sort of goofy little hometown suddenly depicted on screen in a sort of cinematic way, and it was more impactful to me. That was more impactful to me than Taika's other films, Eagle vs. Shark Boy, or Hunt for the Wilder People, which I think for the outside viewer much more exemplify New Zealand, right? Like if you watch those films, you think New Zealand, right? Whereas when you watch,
we think standardized New Zealand, not standardized. What's the word? A cultural zeitgeist New Zealand, like world zeitgeist New Zealand, where I can totally see the specificity of certain things, even as not necessarily the full backdrop of the film, but just sort of where the film is taking place. Like What We Do in the Shadows, one of the great comedic things it does is it takes the extraordinary and turns it mundane, and in there lies the comedy.
Yeah. And
the mundanity
it is mundane.
Is literally the mundane stuff that you used to do in that exact spot, and it felt real because of it.
Exactly. And it's ironic because I think a film like Hunt for the Wilder People has these sort of much more beautiful lands, sweeping vista
That's what
shots.
I picture
Yeah,
New Zealand
that's
to be
what you
like.
picture New Zealand like, but that's not actually the New Zealand. I mean, I've certainly been to places like that in
Are
New
you saying
Zealand.
there's no wilderness in New Zealand?
Yeah, but it's not like when I think of my home, that's not necessarily what I think of.
Sure.
It's really interesting to sort of think about, if you come from a place, like how you feel about, say if you come from Iceland or Switzerland or something like that, and you sort of get and the movies from those areas are kind of picturesque and beautiful if they're made by outsiders, but then if you live there, you might live in some, like a specific sort of city type of dwelling. You might live in a certain kind of apartment, which doesn't exemplify that kind of big vista kind of look.
Ooh, so that plays into something that we do in America that is hilarious and weird. Is if you look at in any real film, New York or L.A.
Yeah, exactly. Those are the two places.
Same thing.
Yeah,
because it's tapping into what we think the cultural zeitgeist of those two places is.
Yeah.
But if you've lived there, a lot of, like, for instance, what's it called? Broad City feels the most New York, I think, ever, because it's the same as what we do in the shadows. It's the mundane stuff that you sort of see every day. Whereas, like, I'm trying to think of even Sex and the City kind of does the same thing too. Though, granted,
New York,
like it's an idealized New York, and it just keeps going. At any movie that's set in New York, I mean, you can be like, well, A, you can't get an apartment like that.
Yeah.
B, you're
Framed
publishing
versus,
assistant. Yeah. So, like, it's the same thing. It's trying to give you the feeling of the idea of the place as opposed to probably the actual feeling of the place.
Yeah, well, I think it's just a different outlook. I mean, you could argue, like, for example, in terms of L.A., the great L.A. filmmaker that depicts L.A. as a city and has an understanding of the geography of L.A. is Michael Mann. In New York, that person is probably Martin Scorsese or Woody Allen. But then, just as you pointed out, we both live in New York City, for example.
Right.
And the movie that most exemplified New York that I know and understand, oddly, was Black Swan.
Oh.
That was the film that, like, and it was a case of, like, arriving in New York for the first time, and you start to come to terms with the geography of New York and seeing it in a way where you realize that, like, when she's catching a subway, she's going from Columbus Circle to the Upper West Side, and and that subway trip, so the stops all of a sudden.
And it's funny, people from a place, if you're dealing with the transit system, they'll call you out.
Yeah, of course.
I literally, on a thing for extra credits, we did an October update video, and I took the subway from one place to the other, which you don't necessarily, like, any New Yorker probably wouldn't do. Mm-hmm. And I got called out on the video because it made no sense that I would take the subway from point A to point B. I'm like, yeah, but I had to get the shot. I was like, it's funny how, like, people. Well, that's the thing. I guess it's what does the audience want, right? Like, if you're interested in the place that you were in and you start seeing similarities, but then something knocks you out of it.
Yeah.
But that wouldn't knock out, say, anyone from anywhere else in the country that hadn't spent time in New York.
Exactly. And I want to really stress that it isn't the case that every film has to make the location accurate. Every film isn't,
right.
The thing I think we've already just identified is that you can talk about a place really broadly, like Bilbao, for example.
Right.
But people who live in a certain neighborhood in Bilbao, like we're in Abando, I think it's called, right now, have a very different opinion about Bilbao than those who live up on the mountainside.
I'm also super curious, just from the audience listening to us's perspective right now, how much of the actual area you can hear, how much of the cars and the conversation. We're in like a little, just to sort of describe where we are right now. We'll see if we can get this a little bit.
We are in kind of a beautiful piazza kind of terrace with a
couple cafes back and forth. We're in an outside area.
Yeah, this episode is brought to you by the Cafe Irona.
Yeah, that's right. Since 1903.
Established in 1903, and we are sipping a beautiful cafe con leche.
They were super nice. They didn't understand us. We didn't understand them.
I know. Somehow we ended up with 2 sticks of meat.
Is it good? You ate some.
I just took a bite of it because I felt rude if we didn't.
I mean, give me one of those sticks.
You want to eat a stick of meat? I think it's a stick of lamb.
Great.
So just so you know, we speak little to no Spanish. We tried to order coffee and ended up with 2 sticks of meat.
We got coffee too.
We did get coffee as well, but 2 skewers of meat. while we're sitting sort of in a sort of lovely piazza,
yeah.
people are coming home from work right now.
There's a park across the way, which actually has been rowdy as all hell.
Exactly.
Like late into the evening, just people like, I guess people go there and drink, and then the cops come and kick them out, but then they just come right back when the cops leave.
And a person who's looking at Bilbao from that point of view would have a very different opinion of, say, the kind of view of Bilbao that that a film like Loreak, which I hope I'm pronouncing correctly, or Flores, that gives. So I kind of, it's just interesting because this is one small facet of a film. But the reason I also think this is interesting is that it's something I like to do, and it's something I think we don't necessarily do, but like discovering a place through the cinema of that place.
Well, here's the deal. Like, I know I was talking about like the actual structure of the roads and the tunnels and the mountains, and at first I was like, oh, that's kind of tertiary stuff. But in a way, it's not. So what happened? I want to break down a little bit of this film. Oh, we have some people coming over from our team. Just bring them on in.
Okay.
Here we go.
So this is going to be one of those awkward things where we're trying to have a podcast here.
I hated the ending.
That was Timothy Delgado, everybody. We'll meet you down there in a little bit. Where are you going to get a drink first? Okay. Well, then I'll text all of you.
So, yes, people are walking past us, getting drinks after work, and enjoying their evening. I feel like it's also, that kind of European thing of grabbing a beer after work.
I'm sorry I'm chewing this meat so much.
Yeah, well, no, that's okay. This is going to be an experiment in outdoor podcasting.
Next, we go hiking.
With all the warts and all. But for example, I have never been to Mexico City. I've never been to Mexico, but I feel like I get a sense of Mexico from a film like Y Tu Mama También. Now, the tourism industry in Mexico might not want me to feel that way. For example, in the case of New Zealand, there is a New Zealand Tourism Board, which has a real heavy role in controlling how New Zealand is depicted on screen, for example. And people of Mexico City might not necessarily want Y Tu Mama También to be the only example of things I do. But Bilbao is an interesting one because I haven't seen any film from Bilbao. So I really wanted to look at that real specificity with the film.
And also, sorry, I got distracted from my point when we saw our entire EMA crew roll up next to us.
Yeah.
The point I was going to make was, the roads are bendy and they go through mountains, and they, there's sharp turns almost everywhere on these, not necessarily the highways. And a large portion, now we're getting into a little bit of spoilers, is about a third through the movie. An instance happens where a character gets into a car accident at one of those bends. And dies. And that person's death affects all the different characters in different ways based on the fact that he may or may not have been delivering flowers to another character. And it's I almost don't want to talk about the film too much.
Yeah, I think we should get to the film sort of because this episode shouldn't be about the film.
Well, I think it shouldn't. It shouldn't. I think. Anyway, we're gonna like I said, meander in and out. But I don't want to dissect a lot of it, because I think what the interesting thing would be is for our listeners to watch this film and see if they think they have a good idea of Bilbao, or, for instance, if they've been here and they've seen it.
Yeah. I think that would be a really interesting thing. I mean, the other example that I have had of this in my life was I visited Tokyo once, and this is not a film related experience, but I visited Tokyo.
Great podcast work.
Yeah, I visited Tokyo, and I was reading Murakami's book Norwegian Wood, and the sort of amazing thing happened where. In the book, they were describing pulling up to, I think, Shibuya train station, and I happened to be pulling up to Shibuya train station just as I was reading that part. And so I had this sort of amazing experience of feeling like I was immersing myself in the environment through a book as I was there at the same time. And that was kind of a really unique experience. So I'm really curious for our listeners, thinking about either the places, as you asked before, the places they're from, and how it's being depicted on screen, whether they agree with it or disagree with it, or whether they feel differently about it. And also, the places that they've discovered through film. Like,
Sure.
for example, a country I've always wanted to visit is Vietnam. And that is because of one movie, and that's a movie called Three Seasons by Tony Bui.
It's not Apocalypse Now?
No, it's not Apocalypse Now.
Wow,
This movie, Three Seasons, depicts Vietnam in the most unbelievably beautiful way, where, like, just because of that movie, Vietnam is on my bucket list of where I want to go in the world.
It's actually interesting. I just had some friends come back from Vietnam, and they hated it.
Right.
They
Well,
hated it
maybe
so
they
much.
it
Maybe
would
they
be
could have gone to a
interesting.
different spot.
They should see this film.
And then maybe...
and just see how they felt about it in relation to that. I mean, are there places that you want to travel to because
Tokyo,
of film?
Japan and Tokyo.
Yeah.
There's been, multiple movies have sort of taken place there. Actually, you know what's weird? And it's totally working. Like Seoul and like all this stuff in South Korea.
Yeah.
Like with the tie-ins with the Marvel films and stuff like that. Like I see the cities, so I was like, that place looks
the places
cool.
that get destroyed?
No, but they don't necessarily get
like South Africa gets destroyed in, what was it, the Avengers Age of Ultron or something like that? It's the first time
Sokovia's in like Eastern Europe.
No, in Age of Ultron, doesn't the Hulkbuster fight happen in South Africa?
Yeah.
And I was like...
No, I meant more because they go to Seoul in also Age of Ultron because they're trying, that's where they're doing the, like... That in Iron Man 3, like, there's these weird tiny subplots because they paid money, like China or South Korea or whoever pays money to, like, make sure that it, like, they have some Chinese or South Korean actors in it and do all this stuff. Anyway, it's working because those cities look really cool to me and I'd like to go.
Especially when they're getting destroyed.
Yeah.
Are there other places, like, just based off movies that you want, like, I think one of the ones that's always beautiful to me is Greece. Greece always looks incredible on film. And for example, the film Mediterraneo was a film I saw very young, and I've always wanted to visit that island.
You know what's funny? Call Me by Your Name and the trilogy of the works of the Italian 80s vacation films.
Yeah.
It's so funny because that would have made me want to go there. Though here's the deal. I've done a lot of traveling in Italy, and I've done that sort of thing before, and that's another example of like how a place sort of feel like that's a very like rich person lackadaisical sort of thing. But when you're on vacation, hopefully you're going to relax. You're not too stressed out about money. And so when I've been and I've gone to these places that are like very, I feel like vacationing in Italy in particular, and at least the places that I've been, has been very like almost familial in the way, like I meet people and it's crazy how like personable they are, as opposed to like if I go anywhere in the US, like that doesn't quite happen as quickly. Could be a temperature and a climate thing, I don't know.
But there's also, like, I don't know if anyone's ever done sort of cinematic tourism. I mean, that's a thing now. Like, for example, in New Zealand, people come and take Lord of the Rings tours. You can still go to Hobbiton, where the Shire is, like actually been fully constructed where they filmed it and stayed up as a tourist location.
And speaking of tourist, entertainment and tourism in that regard, our sister podcast, Speaking of Carrie, Elise Brando and Melissa.
I almost sent my parents, who are visiting New York for the first time, on the Sex and the City tour.
We can get them tickets. Like if they want to go, they can go. Although they bring you to a sex shop and they do a couple other things.
Hey, man, my parents are retired. Like got a lot of time on their hands.
Rock and roll. But I mean, their whole jobs, they're Sex and the City tour bus guides.
Yeah.
And that's a show that was over 20 years ago, man. Like, and people still feel like that's the New York experience, and they go because of a piece of media has shown them something that they think New York is, and that's going to be the lens that they want to see the real place. I know it's a television show, but it's a similar.
And I think there's something with the idea of cinematic tourism, which has to do more with the film than with the place. For example, there's a specific island in Greece. A specific Greek island that was in the film Mediterraneo, which I saw Mediterraneo I think when I was 13 or 14 years old, and I've always wanted to go to that island. But that's that's like 20 odd years ago now.
You should talk to my landlord. He knows everything about Greece.
More than 20 odd years ago, and I'm sure my experience of the Greek islands will be nothing like what that film is, but I would go because I want to experience what I essentially want to. I want to feel like what the way that film made me feel about that place.
And here's the amazing part: it might not do that.
It might not do that at all. For example, like going to or going to Italy, and Call Me by Your Name. Like thinking of the Call Me by Your Name.
But
experience.
It kind of felt like that. So here, that's the weird part. Like it kind of felt like that. But like, for instance, if you come to New York, it's not going to feel like Sex and the City.
Right.
It's just not because of the way that it gives you a feeling of New York, but not a.
So where in the world do you want to go? Based
Well,
on
I've already said. I mean, I would say either Tokyo or.
and Tokyo is based on which is there a particular film or is it?
I'm just trying to think of. Whenever I see something that's taking place in Tokyo, I'm always like, "Ooh, that looks like an interesting." I like a lot of really metropolitan-y stuff, so I tend to.
So very city orientated.
Yeah.
It's funny because I just saw Shoplifters by Hirokazu Kurita, which is a Tokyo film, but it's a very urban Tokyo film. It's like it's set in like tiny apartments,
Right.
alleyways, that kind of thing, and it's a very different experience of Tokyo than say. The only thing I can think of in terms of Tokyo right now is the Katsi trilogy, which has like all those amazing time lapses of Shinjuku Station and that sort of thing.
Right. Well, it's sort of on the flip side of this entire thing.
Yeah.
The film, The Flowers, that we're halfway talking about, is it's not something that I'd be like, ooh, I want to go to Basque Country.
Yeah.
Like, it's not something that is outwardly trying to make a place look appealing. It's not trying to make it look unappealing.
That's our approach to this particular film.
Yeah. It's a slice of life in that particular area, and what location can also be the thing. And I mean, in our case, it's very specific because we were looking for a film that took place in a similar location to talk about, so we could be sitting outside in a beautiful outdoor cafe area next to a park. But you can find certain film based on the location that it is created from. Like, for instance, in college, I was so into South Korean cinema, like
Right.
it was silly.
Yeah.
And it's not only like just because of like the location itself that it's showing me, or a location that it actually sort of feels like. It's because a lot of film that's basically going, comes from a certain region, feels a certain way. You can get a sort of ebb and flow of like the actual culture, the cinematic culture in the area.
Yeah.
And in college, for whatever reason, South Korean film always sort of spoke to me a lot of times more than standardized American film did.
Yeah.
So there's always that draws me to stuff too. Like I like it when different aspects, other than like director or actor, like bring me to a project, and that's something like I 100% fell into regional.
Yeah, I think
hard.
I think the thing that's interesting for me is I'm always, I think my primary mode of finding films is director focused. I like to look at the body of work from a director, and for example, like my understanding of Iranian cinema, comes only from Asghar Farhadi. Because I'm obsessed with his films, and so he is my gateway into Iranian cinema. Did
we do in his films?
What we did.
We did
The Salesman.
Yes.
Which won Best Picture a few years ago. So let's narrow now. Okay, so we've kind of broadly talked about how location impacts film, which is how we discovered this particular film.
Right.
We're in Spain right now. Now we're not in Madrid or Barcelona, but we haven't actually talked about Spanish filmmakers too much on this podcast. Nacho Vindaloo, who did Colossal, is he Spanish or Mexican? This is embarrassing. I should
so
know
embarrassing. But you know what? We're not cutting anything out because I don't know time codes.
Yeah,
because we're doing this on the fly.
Well, of course, the two kind of titans of Spanish cinema are Luis Buñuel and Pedro Almodóvar. Those are the kind of the two most well-known filmmakers from this region, and they're like if you took any class in Spanish cinema, those would be the people you'd probably begin and end those classes with.
Wait, car?
Well, it's good. We're getting a live situation with a car.
I know. I just wanted to go. Okay, game on.
There you
Cars
go.
passed.
But we haven't done a lot of Spanish cinema on this podcast. The only other person that we didn't actually do his film, but the other as far as Spanish cinema today is going is J.A. Bayona, who recently directed the latest Jurassic Park film, the Jurassic World film. So there is obviously some exports from Spanish cinema that are making their way into Hollywood.
Sure.
I think Alex de Iglesias he's made one English film. But so this is essentially our first Spanish film, and now we're getting really specific because we're doing a film that is specific to the region we're in.
Yes.
And that was basically our only criteria for choosing this film. So that's a difficult question, and it's because
well,
we
it's
were
not
going
our
to
only criteria, Shahir, because you chose it because it was not The World Is Not Enough.
Exactly.
There, we're just throwing that out there.
Okay, so my only criteria was it wasn't The World Is Not Enough.
And that it took place here.
So
there are two
every
criteria.
film that isn't The World Is Not Enough could have been in that list.
If it was from here, yes.
Yeah, okay. Now, this is a film that kind of, the IMDb plots, do you want me to do the IMDb plots?
I mean, you have the laptop. This is listen, we're out of the stage here. We can go crazy. Switch it up.
Okay, I'm going to say this again. This is directed by John Garaño and José María Goenaga, and the film is about Anne's life turns around when a week after. I'm going to start that again. I know we're not recording. This is live. We're doing it live.
Okay. I know this is your big moment. I just don't want you to don't choke. You got this.
Don't choke. Okay.
Yeah.
Anna's life turns around when week after week she receives a bunch of flowers at home, always at the same time, and always without a sender's note.
That's right. And by the way, I feel like I just kind of put Shahir on blast a little bit. So many times I mess up the IMDb read and I have to re-record it and re-edit it. So that, even though we're leaving that in here,
I'm totally fine with
just know, dear listeners, that a lot of times I'll be swearing and in a really bad mood because I just won't be able to read it correctly because I'm going so quick. So
we're doing it live, and I'm totally fine being unedited.
All right.
So this is a film of three women whose lives get drawn together because of the actions of some unknown person in the film who begins sending one of the characters flowers.
Yes.
Now, the interesting thing about this film, for me, was the implication of childlessness in this film. The other thing that connects these three characters is not necessarily explicit childlessness, but the importance of having children. So the first character, Anne.
I'm curious where you're going with this.
Well, it's explicitly stated in the film. The first character, Anne, is going through menopause. So and they don't have children.
Yep.
So she is basically at a turning point in her life where she feels like perhaps maybe one of these things that she wanted to do. Like it's mentioned she's going through menopause very early.
I remember one of the first scenes.
Yeah, one of the first scenes. And then suddenly she starts receiving flowers on a daily basis.
Yes.
On a weekly basis with no name. The second character, whom we realize is the partner of the person who is sending the flowers,
right.
Lourdes, has a child, but is being pressured by her mother-in-law, Tere, to have another child with her husband, whom they don't have a biological child together.
Sure.
And it is implied that they can't have children.
I didn't catch that implication, but okay.
Terry says to Beignet, if you want to have a child, just have a child. And
and they go, it's not that simple.
Yeah,
I took it's not that easy or it's not that simple as they didn't want to.
I
didn't take it as any biological
I got the implication that they couldn't necessarily have another child.
No, I didn't get that at all. I thought it was interesting because one character couldn't. One character couldn't no longer have a child even if they wanted to.
Yeah.
And there was also now a couple that probably could and is probably culturally supposed to do that, and they didn't want to because he goes and he's like, we already have so and so.
Yeah, but it's not. That child is not their biological child.
Yeah, but he was fine with it.
And that's what Tere, the grandmother, is putting pressure on them for.
I know, but he was fine with it. They
so
were both
that's
fine
a connecting strand between these two characters is this idea of childlessness and what it means in terms of these characters. Now I think again
I would go even further if you want to go down this rabbit hole, and then you talk about Tere, who eventually loses her son,
and also and she has this explicit line about like nobody dies until they're forgotten, and then she ultimately gets amnesia at the end of not amnesia, she gets Alzheimer's at the end of the film, and forgets her son. Or forgets that her son even, was alive or died. And so this film has to do with mothers and, or women and their relationship to the idea of children.
Sure.
And I think that's, again, I've just had a child, and
have you had a child?
And we've.
I'm always shocked.
Actually, no, not just had a child, but my child just had their third birthday. So it's not
Happy
even close
birthday.
to just had. But I have seen firsthand. And I'm sure every woman has seen this, the pressure that comes when you reach a certain age to have children because of the biological clock.
You've seen secondhand.
Okay. I've seen the pressure firsthand. I haven't experienced the pressure myself.
Okay.
Yeah. So I've seen that pressure kind of applied, and how difficult and painful it can be, and how profound that can be. So that was something that kind of played on my mind very, very explicitly. And then, of course, there's this sort of overt symbolism about the flowers being arrived. Flowers can, in sort of traditional Western literature
Sure.
imply fertility, like virility,
Even
sensuality,
romance to the point, yeah.
Romance to a point as well. And so basically, if you took it on a metaphorical level, this is a woman who is basically, like learned that she will never have children at this stage, and then receives this sort of symbol of fertility or virility or sensuality or somehow way you want to read it.
I mean, I read it
on a daily basis, and it makes her feel
I read it as romantic.
It makes her. It gives her a heightened sense where something was lost and now something is gained.
And then her husband is kind of a doof, even though he makes a point by the. There's something interesting about characters that like you see them being cruel to maybe even cruel, not like physically cruel, negligent of his partner, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, that guy's a dick. But then, like, there's a line or two that, like, makes you sympathetic to him because he's like, who stopped talking to who? And now that's a piece of information that we didn't have in the film. Like, it never gave us. So then we're like, oh, well, was there something else? Like, that's not really the crux of what this movie's doing. I just find that always interesting as a narrative choice when you're, like, going to try to pivot an opinion of a character based on an outside of the film action.
Yeah.
And I don't know how well that works.
I didn't think he was being a dick. Like, I understood.
Oh, he was being a dick.
No, I actually. So, I think I understood the way he was feeling about this. Like, someone is sending his wife flowers on a weekly basis.
I'm not talking about that.
And he's feeling weird about it.
Yeah, and you can totally feel weird about that. That's not the part about him being a dick. The part about being him a dick is she would try to talk to him and he wouldn't speak. And he'd be like, yup, and he'd go and sit down in front of the TV every single time he came home. And there was never, and that sort of exacerbated her excitement about the flowers because here's a man who's supposed to be the most important man in her life, maybe next to her father or, whatever, and that who's ignoring her completely. And then there's some random person, assuming a romantic partner or something like that is sending flowers to her because even though there's no note, but like she wanted to believe that it was because someone was thinking about her.
Right.
Like I think he was negligent and kind of a dick.
It's
the
weird.
flowers thing. Him getting upset about that is an understandable thing because there's in this specific situation outside of how Annie is feeling.
Yeah.
It's kind of creepy if you keep at first it's like ooh maybe got here by mistake.
In any other context, you could read this in a million ways. This could be the beginning of a horror movie. This could be the beginning of Tyler Perry's Position or something like that. You know what I mean? So I think that was that's a sort of interesting thread that this film is kind of pulling on, and it eventually leads into again the family of the person who we're uncertain at the time. When we meet this character Beignet, he may be the person responsible who's sending the flowers, but we don't know exactly. We presume it's him, although it's never explicitly said. There's still some confusion about it in the film itself. Like, there's questions asked about, like, it might have just been a misinterpretation. It might not be him at all. Like, we never see him explicitly doing it. We just presume. And that's all the characters have as well. Because Benet then meets an untimely death, as you mentioned earlier, in an accident. And then there's this sort of... This film has that kind of intertwining storylines around one central focal point. That's something like Inarritu's film Amores Perros or 21 Grams kind of does as well. It's like it's all these characters are sort of circulate around each other based on this one single action, and that is the sending of flowers on a weekly basis. But the interesting thing here is that the sending of flowers is never fully resolved. Again, I think we presume that Benet did it, but it basically sets off a chain of events which are not entirely consequential. It's like it's not because he sent flowers that he died and then this happened to him.
Right.
But it sets off a chain of events that are thematically tied together. So he dies, but then he passes his body. He agrees, almost controversially, to pass his body on to medical testing.
Right.
Yeah, and so, and in a way, he basically allows his body to become, a tool for other people. for other people to learn from, to grow from as well.
Sure.
And this scene, like his wife, Lourdes, eventually becomes estranged from his mother, Terry, and she leaves the family as well. And it's all based around this like single thematic idea of this like single action that consequentially changes the lives of everyone around them. And I think that sort of, it's when those films really work, like in the case of Amores Perros, where Amores Perros all takes place around a single car crash.
Yes.
So a single car crash happens, and everyone's lives around that car crash changes. It spirals out from that moment. 21 Grams does the same thing around another car accident as well. This might be a sort of thing with Inarritu. But this one is it's not a direct connection between everything. It's a thematic connection between them. So almost in a way, plot points, the plot doesn't like necessarily matter so much. It's more how do these events connect to each other thematically.
The skeleton of the film is thematics, but the plot definitely matters because you're getting your pieces of information that you get from that. The theme,
in so much as plot matters to connect you to any film, I guess yes. But I'm saying I'm just saying it doesn't matter. It makes it sound. I don't think it's as important as trying to figure out the thematic in terms of reading this movie. I don't think the plot mechanics in terms of like how like Benet's death, for example, has no connection to anything that's happening on screen.
No, it just happens.
It just happens.
Right.
And his
but that's
choice,
the plot itself, right? Like and because of that death, not necessarily that the plot had to do with this death, it's in the plot he dies. Then the three women who leave flowers actually only really two of them, even though it should have been three, leaving flowers at the point of the accident is what connects the characters together.
But it's the question here, I think that's more important is like, why do they leave flowers and what do the flowers mean for each of them?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like what is so and in your mind, I've been doing a lot of talking here. What do you think? Like, how do you think this film connects thematically this idea of these flowers around these characters?
I think it's trying to speak to the different ways. I guess you'd say it's not trying to say this, but flowers are used as a basically a plot point or a thematic point to illustrate different points of thinking about a person.
Right.
Right. So Annie is feeling negligent or feeling neglected, about things. So she is when she gets flowers from an unnamed person, she starts feeling great again because flowers make you feel that way. When the mother Terry leaves flowers at the site, that's because she misses her son, and that's what you do to mourn and to grieve. When Annie leaves flowers at the site, when she thinks it's this guy Terry who was worked at the same place that she did, but like he kept a necklace of hers for some reason, but we don't really know why. Like there was never any really explicitly like you never saw him like lusting after her or anything.
No,
like that.
yeah, that's the thing. You never get the sense that like it's a.
Yeah.
You're not sure exactly what his intentions were.
And I kind of like that because it's built. The entire movie is built around that. Like I hate movies that like make you like it tells you like this is important, this is important, this is important, and then it doesn't answer it. This movie, and I guess I'm circling back to the way you've sort of said how plot. I would say plot takes a back seat. I would not say it's not important.
I don't think the plot mechanics are that important to how you read this film.
I think they are the catalyst at which the things you read in this film happen. As any plot.
It's a film more interested in symbolism.
Sure. So in that case now Anne is leaving flowers because weirdly I think out of a sense of obligation in an odd way or here's the deal in search of a relationship that she is not currently in. I think there's a little bit of guilt. I think it's a complex set of emotions. And then finally Terry's wife Lori? Is it
Lourdes?
Lourdes.
No, Terry's granddaughter. Her daughter-in-law.
No, sorry. Then who is the Benet?
Benet.
Yeah. His wife. When she never leaves flowers, that's another symbol about sort of how she felt about maybe the relationship or how she felt about her place in the family in the relationship once he was gone. And then the film, spoiler, I guess, the film ends with her leaving flowers finally in the thing.
But there's also this implication when she doesn't. When some of her some of his former co-workers start leaving plastic flowers for him.
The mother gets mad.
The mother gets mad, very upset about that because there's a finality to that. It means that they're not bringing fresh flowers. It means that they're going to forget them. So flowers kind of implicates a
remembrance.
Remembrance or a sense that this person is alive.
Well, and you're thinking about them. And if you tie it into the way that Terry talks about it, when the second you stop thinking about someone, they're truly dead, which is terrifying and amazing.
Yeah, exactly. And then the irony of the film is that she ultimately gets Alzheimer's and forgets her son.
The flowers themselves had a fully realized, I would say, through line throughout the entire thing.
And it's kind of a lovely thing. It's not. I would argue as well. This film, like if we're getting into our final thoughts about it, it's a beautifully shot movie for one, and it is a lovely, lovely movie. It's not. I think thematically, it doesn't connect with me completely, but that's necessarily also because it has a very gentle tone about it. It's very, very gently told. As you said, as we sort of talked about as well, the plot kind of mechanics don't really throw these characters together or force a situation where they're all confronting each other. Although there is that wonderful scene with Anna and Lourdes in the car and they hit the sheep, which is the sheep we see when Binet dies as well. It's kind of this idea that his body metaphysically, imparts onto the sheep.
There's a lot of that.
So it is this kind of beautifully symbolic film, but it doesn't necessarily, in my mind, quite sort of absolutely land. But again, I think we were sort of coming to this film for a very different reason. We were kind of discovering it because again we were coming to the place where this film is necessarily set,
right? As
opposed to trying to discover this sort of undiscovered masterpiece that we're trying to find out, get our audience to listen to or to see. But I think, it is a really fascinating film. I'm very curious if we have any listeners from Bilbao who may have seen this film, or any Spanish listeners. I know we have Spanish listeners that that listen into us who may have seen this movie and may have some different thoughts from it. So they can write us in at onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com or hit us up on Twitter at onlymoviepod.
Yes.
I think more importantly, I'm very curious about this question of how does your relationship to a place connect with the film?
Right, and we can sort of wrap that up after I give my final stuff on this film in particular. I was super psyched to do it because I think, like we even talked about beforehand, places can affect the way we experience either both the place and the cinema, depending on what we see first in a lot of cool ways. And this movie prepped me, I think, for a lot of sort of like the general feeling and tone of, I will say, the landscape, not necessarily this particular city that we're in, but again, it didn't take place in the city. The city wasn't like an important part of this particular story.
It does kind of resemble the landscape we've seen, right?
Yeah, just from walking around. And it gave me sort of a tonal thing. It actually was a great sort of primer for being here in a weird way. Again, not in this particular part of this particular city, but in Basque Country, like how the pacing of life sort of feels. And I think this movie, even beyond that, is a very interesting take on very simple, real human emotions, and I enjoyed it a lot. I think anyone should sort of reach out and reach out across the internet to iTunes or whatever your streaming service you love, and rent it and check it out yourself, because there's a lot of really cool, interesting human elements to this. Not only just from a locational standpoint, but from a human experience and dealing with death and dealing with even this was my final thing. Some of the most fascinating stories are stories that you don't know the end to, as long as it's presented in a way that the end, like finding out the end, isn't the most important thing in the story. And this is one of those things.
Yeah,
you never find out where the flowers came from. You just know that due to the flowers being delivered to Anna, then that these three women's lives were changed forever.
Ultimately changed.
And I think that's super cool. So I think you should check it out.
I think the only thing there is that we're not suggesting as well that this is a masterpiece that you need to go discover.
None of us said that. Yeah, I think it's just interesting.
It's an interesting film because we had to discover this place, and I think
it's an interesting film beyond that. I think I'm thankful that we were coming here. You found this film, and then I got to see it. It would have never been on my radar.
Yeah, we would never have discovered this film otherwise, right? Yeah, and that's an interesting thing. It makes you kind of think about the fact that there are millions of movies all over the place about specific little things that we will never see, but that's what the great thing that travel has the ability to do.
Yeah, and then we'll get to all of them each week. We'll get to every film.
We'll find a film from every small part.
Every part of the, we will have to download our brains to do that once we're old and they don't work anymore. So this has been the only outdoor podcast about flowers in Bilbao.
Yeah.
Shahir.
Coming to you live from Spain. Which other podcast does that?
Probably every other Spanish podcast.
And also we're not coming to you live.
Yeah, so but Shahir, when you're not hyping up the actual liveness of a podcast that will be very much recorded, where can folks find you?
You can find me not in Spain, back in my hometown of Astoria, New York, but also on the internet at www.shahirdaud.com. That's SHAHIRDAUD.com. Matt, when you are discovering the true meaning of botanical flowers, botany,
you can
where can people find you?
You can find me making my potions at matthenwkrol.com for my life and works, or Skeletor, the number 4 PREZ on Instagram, or Emperor MSK on Twitter. Also, I'll check out all the stuff on Extra Credits YouTube. We're doing a bunch of fascinating, neat stuff over there. Next week we'll be back in the studio, pristine audio quality, no conversations in cars and coworkers coming through. This is really fun.
I love hearing Spanish.
No, this is cool. And all you'll hear is the dulcet sounds of our voices and my cat occasionally meowing like a madwoman. We will have you hear us then.
And death will
come for us all.
Yeah, come for us all, I guess. Just like the dying flowers that you may send us at the time.
Don't send us flowers.
Send us flowers. Send us a plastic flower.
I'll
take a plastic
flower.
One plastic flower.
Okay.
Single tulip.
Bye.